So I'm delighted today to have with us my good friend Jenny Kartupelis. And welcome, Jenny. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
My name's Jenny Kartupelis, and my background has always been writing, really. For many years, I run my own public relations consultancy, and then I shifted my work into the charitable sector and helped to set up an interfaith organisation, helping people of different faiths interact with one another and work together.
You actually are now on your second book, which I understand is due for publication very shortly. So how did you go from the initial report to getting a commission, if you did, for your first book, and then on to a second book?
Well, the first thing, of course, was to get permission from my client who had commissioned the original study. And they very kindly agreed to me sharing quite a lot of the material, but not the matters that were confidential to their own business planning, obviously. The first book came about because I co-authored it with someone who's written much more generally about valuing age and older people, someone called James Woodward, who I met through my work for the Abbeyfield Society, because at the time I met him, he was a chaplain in St George's, Windsor, and was able to arrange a conference there for us on the subject. He'd already published with publishers called Jessica Kingsley, who specialise in these types of issues. And so we rather easily secured a contract with Jessica Kingsley to co-author the book, rather more easily than I'd realised at the time. So the book I'm about to publish really took things to the next level.
So how did you go about finding a publisher for your second book?
Well, that's a long story that I'll try and cut short. When I started on the second book and started to talk to people about whether they would enable interviews in their workplaces and so on, I actually thought that it would be commissioned again by Jessica Kingsley and it would all be quite plain sailing. But that particular publisher got bought out by a large American group and changed direction and no longer had a great interest in the area in which I was working. So then I faced what a lot of people normally face, which is, can I find a publisher? Shall I self-publish or shall I give up on the whole thing? I didn't want to give up because already people had committed to helping me. And also I just thought that there was something to be said. And if I didn't say it, it might not get said. So then the choice was how to publish, if I made the choice that I definitely would. And I should say at this point that there is absolutely no money in this. I believe if you self-publish, you can sometimes make quite decent money, especially if you have, best-selling novel, you'll do very nicely. But the sort of thing I've been writing, you will never make money from. You will only put money into it by way of your own time. So that's just a little warning, really. Weighing up the pros and cons of self-publishing or finding a publisher, I think if I'd been writing something like a novel, I might have taken a risk on self-publishing. But when you're writing a rather niche book and a factual book such as mine, there's a few reasons why that's more difficult. One is that I think you need the endorsement of a publisher to get you to the market at all. It needs to be seen that somebody was interested in what you've got to say. The other thing is that it's quite a complicated process to publish a non-fiction book. And you need a helping hand from the publisher through all those stages. And so in a way, you're exchanging any money you might have made for the helping hand and the expert knowledge they can provide. So I pitched my idea to a few publishers, and I chose them by looking at who had published the sort of thing I was writing about. So just doing a search on Amazon, really. Was there anything similar to my book? And if so, who'd published it? So if you find a lot of things that are similar to your book, that's going to ring alarm bells, because you might not feel that you're offering anything new. If you find nothing similar to yours, that could be a good sign there's a niche in the market, or it could be a bad sign nobody wants to read about it. Anyway, I found some things that were a bit similar, but not covering exactly the same ground, and who'd published them. And I then wrote a synopsis of my plan and started sending it to people. I did get some interest, but some of the publishers who were interested reckoned that it wasn't sufficiently academic for their markets, and it was never intended to be academic anyway. In the end, I was extremely fortunate that Routledge, who are very well known and have an excellent reach into the market, said they were interested. They normally published things that were more academic, but they would quite like to test out something of this type. So that was the first stage. The next stage with that sort of publisher is that they want a very detailed outline of your plans and your markets and what you see as competitors. And they then send it to be peer reviewed, which means that people who are working in the same field as you have a look at the proposal and comment on it. And they're very rigorous. And the first 3 who peer reviewed my synopsis actually turned it down and pointed out gaps. But Routledge stuck with me and allowed me to try again and fill in the gaps. And then they sent it to another 4 people, 3 of whom said yes, they thought it was worth publishing. So at that point, we drew up a contract. Well, they drew up a contract, because really they have a lot more power than the author. And with a couple of queries that we managed to sort out, that was the contract that I signed.
It's a huge learning curve, isn't it? Being able to go through all these stages and learn about the publishing. We've got you with a publisher. You've fought your way to getting this second book published, and now you're in the throes of editing and proofing and all that goes into it. So what's the next step for you with your book, and how close are you to publishing?
I'm probably closer than I originally expected to be, because due to the coronavirus and the pandemic, for some reason the publishers decided to bring the publication date forward. And I think there could be a few reasons for that. One may be simply that some of their authors weren't able to complete in time and they've pushed me up the schedule. But I'd like to think it's also because some of the things I'm saying are highly relevant to what's going on in care homes at the moment. So to give people an idea of the sort of timing of these things, I agreed the contract, I think it was May 2019, and I'd already done a lot of the research by then, but there was lots more to do. And the publisher asked me to have the full final manuscript with them by March 2020. So I thought, wow, that's plenty of time, but it wasn't. And in the end, I was working flat out, really. So the manuscript goes to the publishers. It's still called a manuscript, which is very old-fashioned because, of course, it's not. It's a Word document. And it has to be sent to them in very, very specific formats and so on. Once the publisher has that, then we go through several stages. And those stages, they reckon, will normally take about 6 to 8 months. And they include a pre-proof. which is when they send you back the manuscript with masses of queries. Is this reference correct? Did you really mean this date? Is there a better word to use here? Really helpful, but that takes a long time to sort through. Then you send it back to them and they continue their process. And the next thing that happens is that they've put it into a PDF with page numbers. They send it back and they want two things: a final proof, and now you're just looking at really specific stuff like, you know, is that comma really meant to be there? And the second thing they want at that stage is the index. The index is a real challenge, and I hadn't worked on anything quite like it before. It sounds so simple that you'll just list alphabetically all the key words you use and the pages on which they appear, and do that by a search of the PDF. But it isn't like that at all, really. What you've got to index are whole concepts, and you've got to do it in such a way that all the time you're thinking of your audience. If I was looking in that book and I wanted to find something, what word would I look for in the index? You know, it's no good saying relationship because that's on every page. What would I look for? Funding, of projects, meal times, you know, all these things have to be done. So that takes weeks. Then you send that index back along with your proofed PDF. And again, it disappears into the publication process. So when I submitted my original manuscript in March, I was given a provisional publication date of early October, but that's now been brought forward to early September. I have to say I was very good about meeting deadlines. Thinking about the academics I've worked with, I suspect academics aren't always very good about deadlines. So maybe because I did stick to them, mine got pushed up the schedule a bit for that reason as well. And so I'm really looking for publication early September. Next big thing is a publicity plan.
Yes, whole new thing. So being a writer is obviously a challenge in itself, and you know, many congratulations for getting 2 books to this stage. But really, there's a whole host of other skills you have to develop along the way. So writing is kind of almost one tiny part of the book production, isn't it?
Well, as you said earlier, it's a really steep learning curve. And I think it's probably rather different from writing a book of fiction, which would be more challenging in other ways, but wouldn't need some of this stuff doing, like the indexing, obviously. Yeah, there are a lot of other skills that are useful. I found that having run businesses in the past, organisational skills were good. There's also the question of self-discipline, really, because you're totally on your own with all this, and you must stick to the deadlines. If you get a good publisher, as I did, they'll give you a lot of advice. And in a sense, you're paying for that advice by receiving a very low commission or royalties, really. The royalties in my agreement were very low, but that's fine if you accept it as the exchange you make for getting the good advice and the help. I believe if you self-publish, you can buy in some of those skills. So, for example, you could get someone else to do the proofing. You could get someone else to advise you on the publicity, and I'm trying to do my own mainly. You could get someone to do your indexing, but that's quite difficult because they need to understand your subject matter very well. So if you can do it yourself, it's good. It's a learning curve, but then just think of all the learning you're doing that you can use again, which is a great thing. And it's a sense of achievement in getting it done.
Very much so. So could you imagine actually doing another book now you've survived 2?
I think I'm at the never again stage, though I believe people who've had more children than I have say this each time they have one, never again, and then they go ahead and think how lovely they are, and they might have another. I can't imagine that there's a lot more I would want to say about this particular subject, though I might be wrong. So I think I'm at the I can never go through this process again stage, but ask me next year and maybe I'd say something very different.
Excellent. Well, many congratulations and thank you so much for sharing the process with us today. I know that, as you say, you're hoping to launch the book in September, and perhaps you can come back later and tell us all about how that went and how you went about promoting the book. But for now, Jenny Kartupelis, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Joanne. Great pleasure.